Hi. If you find this content useful, please support my channel on Patreon. Become a member of the family and get yourself the offered rewards. You find the link in the description. This video was requested by Brülbart, my first supporter, and I really hope it will help him. And if it does for him, perhaps this can be helpful for anybody else struggling with this whole topic. I'm sorry for the delay of this video, but it was only requested on last Friday, and searching for a different way to perhaps make this topic more understandable was really challenging. Compression. The holy grail nearly everybody is talking about as if it were magic. Brülbart wrote that he still struggles with applying compression to his own work, and that this constant technobabble about threshold ratio doesn't get him anywhere. He was asking for lots of practical examples instead. I can understand that very well, as I was long time in the same boat. On the other side, I know very well too that only watching somebody doing the work for me doesn't solve the problem. If somebody has problems applying compression to his own stuff, it's not a lack of examples or experience. It's a lack of understanding of the actual process. Examples and experience will later on improve these skills, but it is impossible to do the second step before the first. Dynamic processing is a quite complex topic, and pure imitation is simply not enough as long as I do not understand its essence. And with essence, I do not mean the basic knowledge what threshold or ratio does. With essence, I mean knowing what actually happens to my sound if I turn this knob or the other. To be able to visualize in my head what exactly happens to the sound in every moment of the process. With essence, I mean how to listen correctly to be able to even recognize how the compressor changes the sound. Without these skills, how will I decide what to do, how to do it, and if my sound even benefits from doing so? How do I want to listen to differences if I have no clue what these differences really are? How will I judge whether changes I make are going in the right direction or the wrong? The truth is, the technical part of a compressor is super simple, but the why and the what aren't. Why do I want to compress a sound? What do I expect the compressor to do? How will it change the sound? And what are the resulting differences I have to listen to, I have to pay attention to? I'm really sorry. But without explaining some things, we cannot go straight to the point. I am sure these precisely are the things that make it difficult for so many people to deal with this issue. So please bear with me. I try to make it as short and as clear as possible. But enough talking, let's get started with the first kind of job a compressor can do for us, or at least can be part of this process: sound shaping. Listen carefully to this kick. Try to analyze it. Break down the sound into its individual parts in your thoughts. How does the attack sound to you? How do you think about the punch? What about the body? What about the length? Is it too thin or perhaps too boomy? Learning to listen. To be able to analyze a sound, breaking it down into its components and focusing on certain elements is perhaps the biggest challenge for a music producer. But it is so crucial. Being able to analyze a sound by ear, isolating in your head certain frequency ranges, certain points in time, or elements in a mix, brings you a lot closer to any goal of manipulating sound, not only compression. Based on this analysis, you can decide much better which way to go. Which way to go? That's a good key point. It is very important to understand this, especially with sound shaping. The choices I show here are not necessarily the best way or how it should sound in principle. It's just how I want to let it sound. The final decisions will be different to every individual. There is no right or wrong apart from a very few general rules. If 100 different people with the same experience and knowledge worked on this kick, believe me, we would have 100 different results. But that's fine and is not the point. The first goal is to enable everybody to hear the same thing, to hear what's really there, and to hear and understand the changes I do. The second goal is to enable everybody to understand what I can change and how I can change it. Everything else is just personal preference and depends on the situation what kind of sound I'm after. The way I treat this kick is just what I prefer. Please keep that in mind. It's not important if you like the final sound or if you agree with my choices. But what matters is that you understand what led to the final result and that you are able to apply it to your own taste to any other kick if you wish so. I personally like this kick very much, but there are two things I don't like at all. First, it has too much punch in the low mid-range. It sounds to me a bit like knocking on wood. Second, in the attack there's some kind of ringing sound, a bit like a tambourine. Kicks have a big advantage. Attack, punch and body happen in different frequency ranges. The attack is mostly present in the high end, the punch in the mid-range, while the body is focused on the low end. That basically screams for being treated by an EQ. So let's try if I can solve my problems this way. I cloned the same kick 3 times and routed it to 3 different mixer tracks that we can easily A/B the different results. The first channel will stay unprocessed. On the second, I will use just an EQ. And on the third will be the attempt with a compressor. Using an oscilloscope is especially handy for learning how the different processes influence the sound. Please try to keep an eye on it to check how the waveform changes. Just listen for the moment and try to follow what I do. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, not bad so far. Let's go to the third kick channel and try with a compressor. The easiest method to learn what a compressor does is to go with complete overdriven settings. Threshold to the minimum. Ratio to max. Attack to 0. Release we leave for the moment as it is. Please note that I always work without any look-ahead delay by setting the attack of the limiter section to 0. Let's hear it in action. Okay, there's not much left. Let's try to visualize what happens. At the very end, a compressor is nothing else than a volume automation. And the knobs you can tweak set the time and the level of the points of an envelope. Making this internal envelope visible helps me personally a lot to understand what happens at which point in time. Please just note that automation clips aren't as precise as a compressor at this extreme settings and aren't as smooth when notes are moved, so there will be some differences, even that you will hear the kick unprocessed sometimes. But I hope you'll get the idea. This is what the envelope of the compressor looks like at the moment. There's not much sound left either. By the way, switching between pattern and song mode means switching between compressor and automation clip. Although most people immediately think of threshold and ratio when it comes to compressors, the far more important factors are attack and release. Let's start with a very simple approach to this topic and first increase the attack. By moving this node to the right, I allow more and more of the sample to be heard. The more I move to the right, the more signal get through unaffected. Let's compare that to the compressor. Okay, that seems to be similar. On the compressor, I leave the attack about here. Watch what happens when I play around with the release. Listen and have a look at the graph of the compressor. By increasing the release time, it gets too long at a certain setting. The compressor isn't able to go back to 0 before the next kick hits. And the next attack disappears more and more. Let's look at our automation clips. Making the release too long reaches far into the next sample. And even if the second automation clip for the following hits wants to play at full volume on the attack, the previous envelope still holds the signal down. That means the release has some limits we have to respect. Looking at the BPM to milliseconds calculator at a tempo of 120, which we use in our example, 1/16 has a duration of 125 milliseconds. With our samples in the playlist, we can see that in between the end of the first kick and the start of the next one, we got just 2/16 left, means 250 milliseconds. If I set now the release to 250 milliseconds, this should be the maximum point before the previous release would reach into the next attack phase. With the curve number 4 I've set here, it's even less. Everything over 230 milliseconds already affects the next hit. Going any higher then kills the next attack more and more. Please keep that in mind. If you use a compressor for sound shaping on repeating sounds, like drum hits, the release has to end before the next hit starts. On our automation clips, this would be about here. Otherwise, you will always have the first drum hit sounding different to the following ones. When I start the playback, the first hit has a clear transient. But the following are cut. The other extreme gives us trouble as well. Setting the release below 50 milliseconds starts to distort the sound. Please keep an eye on the release curve of the graph. gets more and more distorted. And even worse with deeper curve settings. Setting it to short makes the internal envelope of the volume automation move that fast that it starts to distort the sound. The technical details why this happens shall not bother us for the moment. It's just important to keep in mind how the timing of the compressor's envelope has a big impact on the final result. The attack defines how strong and sharp the initial transient of the kick comes through. The release has in this case not a big impact, but you have to set it right. Too short is bad, the sound starts to distort. Too long is bad, it kills the following transients. The compressor's threshold and ratio are basically nothing else than defining the level of the bottom points of my automation clip. How much shall the automation bring down the volume? Even if there is always a lot talk around it, its functionality is nothing else. Please try to remember this always you're working with a Dynamics plugin. Try to visualize your settings as if it were an automation clip. This is the closest comparison to get your head around the action happening hidden in the box behind the few knobs you have available. You might have already heard or even experienced yourself that different compressors sometimes create a different sound. There are different designs. Besides they differ in some technical details, the main reasons are differences in the shape and the possible speed of the volume automation. The shape of the clip envelope in our example here. Some compressor designs are fast as hell and allow super fast attack and release times without distorting. Others are very sluggish. Even at their fastest settings, they have a very slow response. Some use very curved shapes. Others might be more linear. Fruity Limiter had this curve selector going from more linear to a stronger curve. Some might use different shapes for attack and release. Others might use similar ones. Maximus, for example, has a separate curve selector for attack and release to offer more flexibility. Some compressors might compress first harder and go up again over time. Other might do the opposite. All these differences let them distinct from each other, let them sound different when applied to the same material, and makes them preferable for different tasks. Some compressor designs are better in processing drums or guitars. Others shine on vocals and pads. Some are brilliant in processing single sounds. Others work better on complete groups or buses. It's always a good idea to have a small collection of different models at hand, with the emphasis on small. You can work far better and more efficient when you know 3 or 4 plugins inside out than 10 or 15 just a little bit. Back to our little example here. After having set attack and release to where I like, I lower the ratio to 4:1. Now let's play a bit with the threshold. Again, try to analyze the differences by ear. If I go too high, I get back this ringing in the attack because the volume envelope doesn't suppress it enough. Going down too far does not change anything in the sound, but just makes it quieter. My personal sweet spot is around -18 dB. If there is any, I can only imagine one golden rule for adjusting threshold and ratio. As much as needed, but as little as possible. I have to lower the threshold until I think I've gained all of the benefits for my sound. Snappy attack, but without this tambourine sound. Once I reached what I like, there's absolutely no need for going any deeper. After as good as possible comes often bad. But now I've lost a lot of volume. Just raising the makeup gain of the fruity limiter destroys all the work I've done before and brings back more of the original sound. Let's leave the compressor alone and search for a different way. With drum sounds, the best choice will be often to go with an EQ. This way I can boost the frequencies I like to have prominent and let alone or can even eliminate more of the waste. The kick is just a bit boomy now, but it's not too much low end in terms of volume as you can see on the oscilloscope. The shown level here is just fine for a kick. It's more the duration. The low frequency range stays on the same high level for too long. This is a perfect use case for another volume automation the most should be familiar with. The simple volume envelope of the sampler or synth. This is a result I like against my starting point. Perhaps a bit clipping to get the same loudness for a fair comparison. AB with the same peak level and the same loudness. The version with the EQ isn't bad neither, but for my taste I feel the compressed version being better under control. It feels more solid and more on the point to me. Which one really works better I could only judge in a mix, but compared to the original it's like night and day. Again, it doesn't matter if you personally like how it sounds now. But with a such cleaned up version, I only start realize how dirty the kick originally sounded. I will stop here as I don't want to delay this video even more. There will be a second part soon with less blah blah blah, but more and above all different examples. Dynamic processing in general is actually a very simple issue. It is just often presented in a very complicated way. I would really love to get these problems out of the way for everybody who's interested in, laying a foundation on which everyone can build, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much effort it requires. But I need your help. Please do me a favor and tell me in the comments if this kind of explaining was any more helpful or if I missed the point again, that I can perhaps improve the second part. Of course, any questions and suggestions are very welcome. See you soon, and thank you for watching.